But we need to move on to our main topic.
We do, because this is a big one. We told you all at the end of the last episode, we wanted to discuss this time around monsters and enemies, and some other things that I've thrown into the list, Dave, when we get to them, that New Who has brought back, and did they do it successfully or not?
Yeah, so we're just going to have a bit of a chat about this. We've made a bit of a list, but we're not going to sort of be going through in any kind of rigid chronological order or anything. We just want to have a bit of a chat about what works and what doesn't. And so I think before we mention any, what is it that you look for in a returning monster?
I look for a returning monster, Dave, to resemble what they've been in the past, so that they are categorically, that monster. They haven't been changed too much, and that they also sort of operate in the same way as well. If they were mute, they suddenly can't speak, or if they could speak, they're suddenly not mute, or, that's a terrible example, but they've got to be basically the same thing, but just updated in some way.
That sort of spiritual truism?
Oh, yeah, it's got to be there. Otherwise, why bother calling them whatever they are?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the other thing is to look for a reason for them to be there that isn't just, well, we're bringing them back.
I completely concur with that.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting is when I reflect back on, 13 years ago now, that excitement that came from the knowledge that, okay, the Daleks were coming back in season 1, that was the big thing. And then it was, well, are we going to get something similar in season 2? And will it be the Cybermen? And everybody's sort of gone, well, that's a pretty obvious thing, but the BBC was doing that whole, really rigid, covert, no, we're not confirming anything, we can't say anything, we're not saying the Cybermen are coming, no. As a result, that my friends and I spent quite a lot of time simply referring to them as the spoiler men. We weren't allowed to talk about them, and even now occasionally in emails we'll talk about, hey, apparently there's going to be a Spoilerman episode coming up. So
nice.
but yeah, that did become an annual thing, and it's still around a bit now. That, and fans perhaps don't like to admit it, but we do get excited about the nostalgia of bringing back a monster from our childhood, or a monster from a story we love. And there always is that anticipation. What's it going to be in season 3? What's it going to be in season 4? What's the new monster going to come back? And that was something that RTD particularly did.
And as time has gone by, I really don't want to preempt any of these, but as time's gone by with some of them, it's almost been not so much, are they coming back, but are they going to do them well?
Yeah, and I was very interested to realise recently that when the Autons came back in Terror of the Autons, they were something like only the 5th monster to get a return in the series so far after 8 years.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, Dalek, Cybermen, Yeti, Ice Warriors.
Yeah.
And then the Autons. So in 8 years, they were only the 5th monster to come back.
Far out. Well, look, should we start with the Autons, perhaps?
A very good place to start. They, of course, were the framing device for the first episode of the new series. And look, we talk about hitting the nostalgia button with some of these. My God, were they hitting the nostalgia button with the Autons?
Oh, absolutely. But, a lot of the audience wouldn't have seen them before. For us, for old fans, it was the nostalgia button. For new fans, I think it would have just been creepy and weird, and maybe how people felt when they were watching the first Pertwee story.
And that's the great thing about the way the Autons were done in Rose. I think they were really, really well done. As you say, if you don't know what they are, it's just this really creepy concept of shop window dummies moving and chasing you down. And those first scenes with Rose underneath the shop in the basement are really effectively done. But yeah, as fans, we know what it is. We've got that extra frisson of excitement. And then you get the scene of them breaking through the shop windows. Again, for somebody who's new to the show, seeing Doctor Who for the first time, that's just an incredibly cool shot. For us, it's an incredibly cool shot, like they did in Spearhead from Space.
Well, yeah, Dave, I too love the way they were brought back, and I'll bring up that scene, because in that scene, where they smash through the window and they're rampaging and there's taxis, going all over the place and stuff's on fire, it's amazing, and it's what we thought happened in Spearhead, but never did. And the famous example there is that they didn't even break the glass of the shop window in Spearhead, even though for years later everyone would swear that they broke the glass.
Yeah, and finally being able to see that because we now have a budget that allows us to break a pane of glass. was really cool.
Exactly. So for me, I just love seeing the scene that always happened in my head was now actually happening for real in the show. And although there were some comedic bits in that story, and I always mention the wheelie bin and stuff like that, oh wow, that scene where they're just mowing people down in the street, there's real menace, there's real terror. It's really scary. It's probably one of the scariest scenes in New Who still, I think.
Oh, I think so. And again, they were able to do stuff that they couldn't have done in the 70s or even the 90s, let's face it. For example, the Mickey Auton replica taking his head off. That you could imagine that being done with CSO or something back in the 70s. I mean, I can remember stuff like the Ghosts of Motley Hall doing that. Yeah. And it's terrible.
Yeah.
But they could do that really, really well.
Or the Leisure Hive.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that brings me to, of course, the other monster that technically comes back in that same story, and that's the Nestines.
Yes.
And that is a very good example of taking a monster that was a really cool idea with a really bad execution and just saying, let's just do this as we kind of always wished that we could have done it. And so that, Nestine consciousness creature that we see at the end of Rose is considerably better than the limp tentacles that attack Pertwee and Spearhead or the sort of glowing, blurry, lighty thing that descends upon Jodrell Bank in Terror of the Autons.
Yeah, very much so. I always think, though, although I get what's going on, I wonder how a casual viewer takes that, hearing about, the Nestine consciousness and anti-plastic and all this. It happens very quickly, and that's maybe where the episode falls down a bit for me. It's almost like a bridge too far to be introducing that.
Look, it is, but without going back to sort of reviewing Rose, let's face it, that story is not about the Nestines or the Autons.
No.
They're just a framing device for Rose to meet the Doctor.
Yeah, very true. So I would say, look, I love the way the Autons are brought back. I'm a bit ambivalent about the Nestine consciousness, although it looks quite okay. But yes, it's really a thumbs up for this monster coming back. Good.
Shall we then go to what is probably my one really big thumbs down?
It could be mine too if we're talking about the same thing.
Would there be spoiler men involved, Rob?
Now that I've learned the term, Dave, yes, the spoiler men.
Yeah, look, I don't know what the broad fandom consensus is on these, and let's face it, I don't really care. My opinions are mine. And if you disagree with me, hopefully we prompt some discussion.
Yeah.
I think that the Cybermen have been pretty universally terrible in the new series, and to me they are the one really big fail for the new series under both Davis and Moffat. I think they look terrible. I really don't like the new modern look. I think they're just great big thick robot things. I don't like the stomping. And I think they really have missed the Cybermen at their best, which is that desperation to survive and that cybernization of people. Famously, Tomb of the Cybermen, one of their classic stories, episode 2 doesn't end with a great big bunch of robots coming out of the tombs, which is a wonderful visual shot. It ends with the cyber controller walking up and saying, "You will be like us."
Yeah.
Even in the opening story, and there's a couple of points there that I can make, but I'll make one and then hand over to you for a bit. Even in the opening story where they could have really done that body horror, and you get a little bit of it with the Cybermen that they sort of dismantle in the tunnels or the sewers, whatever they're doing. But that kind of ridiculous shot of all the lasers and the scissors coming down and doing stuff, I just thought it was so tacky. You've said they're a big negative for you, Rob. Why for you?
They've just done extremely poorly in every outing, probably until World Enough and Time, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Yes, we do.
Because they've just come across as robots. Even in episodes where they've gone out of their way to show that they're chopping up people to put in the suits, and the famous one is Yvonne Hartman from Torchwood, and then she cries that oily tear and all that nonsense.
Yes, yeah.
Even showing that they're chopping up people to do this, they're still shown to walk in lockstep and to just have their catchphrase, delete, because they're like a cut-price Dalek saying exterminate, and it's just... No, I like Cybermen who can actually have a conversation. They're still logical, but they're people. At the end of the day, they are people in suits. That's what they're meant to be. They're not bloody robots. And it's like these writers just goes over the top of their head, and they just write them as robots. I don't get that at all. How can you understand Doctor Who and not understand that?
Yeah, look, I'm with you, and I would argue, and some will disagree, I would argue that all of the original costumes at least referenced in some way what the Cybermen were. If only the chest unit itself, which is that replacement for the hearts and the lungs, the thing, that's there. Whether it is, of course, in the 10th planet, you get the human hands and the voice. Whether it's with the 80s Cybermen, particularly in Earthshock, where you get there's a remnant of flesh moving under the mouthpiece.
Yeah.
That's lacking from the new series Cybermen. And given the budget they have now, surely they could have done something really, really cool with that concept.
Oh, you'd think so. To show that it's just a shocking parody of a human, but it's still a human in there. Yeah. Oh, they could do something quite horrific, some real body horror. But no, they're just robots, tin robots. That's all.
And they're very competent tin robots, which maybe that's not the right word, but the Cybermen in the original series were usually a pretty desperate bunch. They were always sort of on the edge of destruction. They were always trying to survive, with the one exception of Earthshock, where they seem to have finally put together a bit of an empire, and they promptly go and get smashed by the humans anyway. The Cybermen are not this all-conquering, all-powerful race. And the final point that I want to make before we do mention their final appearance, which I think it does need its own separate mention, is the fact that RTD felt the need to go to a parallel universe to recreate them.
Yes.
I kind of get what he was doing there, but after that, it's sort of like, well, hang on, are the Cybermen we see now all from the parallel universe? Because the first couple of stories they were, or are these the same Cybermen but different? Are they Cybermen and Cybusmen? I don't know. I think it kind of didn't wrap that whole thing up very well. And yeah, look, for me, the Cybermen have just never quite worked, with the exception of, as you rightly point out, the Doctor Falls.
Yeah, World Enough in Time and the Doctor Falls. But before we get to that, I'll just concur with you on the whole Cybus Industries thing. It's the fan in me, I know, but I would just look at them and think, well, they're not real Cybermen. They're not from Mondas. They're, and having the C for Cybus Industries is almost like C for Cyberman on their chest. And I was like, oh, that's just horrible. It's cheesy. It's awful. And they did get rid of that, so I assume at that point we were meant to believe they were Mondasian Cybermen, or derived from Mondas, at least, eventually. But, it wasn't until that Moffat story, which ripped off large chunks of spare parts, one of my favourite Big Finish stories, that they were back to being what they should be. It was just horrific. It was humans in suits. It was scary. When Bill woke up with the chest piece attached to her, I felt sick watching that, imagining what if that was me, waking up and this metal thing's grafted into you and you can't get rid of it. Awful. That's, 10 times worse than anything we saw in all the previous Cybermen stories in New Who put together. Yeah,
there's a great Doctor Who Virgin missing adventure called The Killing Ground.
The Colin Baker one.
The Colin Baker one. It's written by Steve Lyons. And it's got two wonderful concepts in there. The first is that it actually gives us a cybernisation from somebody's point of view, which is a iconic scene in those books. The other is it's set on a colony that has been conquered by the Cybermen. And the Cybermen come along every, whatever the period is, and harvest the young men to go and be turned into Cybermen. So it is this idea of a human farm for the Cybermen. And they rebel by basically creating a suit of armour that has a computer that links into the brain, etc., to fight back against the Cybermen. And suddenly you actually see these people sacrificing their humanity and effectively becoming Cybermen to fight the Cybermen. And that, again, is that reference to how desperate does humanity have to become to give up their humanity to survive. That's what the Cybermen is all about. That's what the Killing Ground gets right. It's what some of the early stories get right, particularly in the 60s. And I think that's where World Enough in Time is going as well and gets right.
Wouldn't that make a great two-parter?
That would be amazing.
Yeah. And when stories like this are out there and unknown to people, why do we persist in writing such horrible stories sometimes? I don't get it, Dave.
Yes, so look, it's good that they had that good appearance. I think everybody was really impressed by how they did that Mondasian design, but even then they kind of had to pull the rug at the end and go, no, these aren't actually from Mondas after all. This is just a whole different bunch of Cybermen that whatever. It's like, oh... You couldn't just give it to us, could you? You just had to take that little bit at the end.
Yeah, I know. But we've got to move on.
And look, listeners, please, if you disagree with us, tell us why the Cybermen are great, why you love the Cybermen in the new series. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just say, the Cybermen are still my favourite Doctor Who villain. I just don't like how they've been done in the new series.
Interesting.
Now, we can't talk Cybermen without talking about the Daleks as well, obviously being the two big Doctor Who baddies.
Daleks, tell me more.
Nice one. I'm going to say, very simply, aside from the huge misstep in Victory of the Daleks that even Stephen Moffat thinks was pretty shit, I think that quote he made in that interview on YouTube recently was like, we made them big. What were we doing? That's just crazy. They're not meant to be like that. So even Moffat thought that was shit. Aside from that, they've been done very well, I think, in terms of the way they look. They were updated, they were recoloured, but they still look like Daleks. They look tough, they look mean, they look like they could stand their ground on a battlefield. And also in terms of their attitudes, they were still Daleks. They weren't trying to do something new. Or maybe apart from that Daleks in Manhattan thing, but, the least said about that, the better.
Yeah, and we're not looking at the stories, we're looking at the actual monsters themselves.
Yeah.
I agree. The Daleks have been absolutely phenomenally, groundbreakingly brilliant in the new series. They are one of the best things about the entire new series. I think, without a doubt, they've brought them back. As you said, the design is very true to the original, whilst being better than the original, whilst doing things that the original couldn't do back on the old budgets. Stuff like that moment in Dalek where suddenly the midsection swivels around and takes a shot and then swivels back.
Yeah.
Or the way that it floats up above, and I remember watching Dalek thinking, how cool is this? Suddenly it's doing all the things production teams would have done if they'd had the money and the technical know-how. At the same time, when I think about what's great about the Daleks in the original series, it is that absolute terror that they are going to be successful. When you have that moment in Dalek's master plan where one of them says one Dalek is capable of exterminating all, you believe that.
Yeah.
And again, when Eccleston says this Dalek can wipe out this entire city overnight, you believe that. It's the utter callousness of them. I've said before, my favourite Dalek story is still Dalek Invasion of Earth. There are moments in that of just utter soullessness, utter heartlessness. There's one very memorable scene where Susan and David are hiding and they can hear a man being chased by the Daleks. You don't see any of it, but you just hear him. Clearly he's sort of been caught and he's just going, no, you can't. You've killed them, my wife, my kids, you've done... And then he's shot. And it's a really grim moment. And again, you see that in a moment of rare violence, particularly against kids, in Stolen Earth. There's that family that comes out to protest the Daleks.
Yes.
And they're sort of shouting at them and then they throw a brick at him or something. And then the mother, the father and the kid go inside. And then the Daleks destroy the house.
Yeah, yeah.
Presumably including the mother, the father and the kid.
Yeah, now that's heavy.
Yeah. And the Daleks let you do that.
Oh, absolutely. And they've just been so well done. It's something I sort of feared, what would they be like when they came back, but they just nailed it. And although there've been a few wishy-washy stories, I know we're not talking about specific stories, just the way they are in general, just great.
Yeah, absolutely. The one fault they had, and I think that this is a victim of their success in many ways, and not realising how quickly the show would take off and how long it would be. I mentioned this when we did our RTV versus Moffat thing, is that idea of, okay, in Dalek you've got the last Dalek ever in the universe. And then a few episodes later you've got, the other last Dalek ever in the universe, but they've been wiped out now. And then you've got, and here are the 3 other Daleks that are left in the universe. But we've wiped them out. There's the one surviving Dalek from that. As I say, Victory of the Daleks is a poor story in many ways, but at least at the end of it, they're just like, no, the Daleks are back. We don't have to have an excuse to bring them back every time.
Yeah, very true. Moving along, here's a more obscure character, Dave. I'm going to throw up the Great Intelligence.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what my opinion is on this one. And
I was going to let you have the first go.
No, I'm going to cheat here and I'll let you have the first go.
Okay, all right. This is a character I really like, probably based on reading Target novels back in the day. Unfortunately, in New Who, and I really love Richard E. Grant, let me say that up front too, the character just doesn't do it for me. On screen, it's left me cold. It feels uninteresting, maybe not even threatening, which is weird. Even when it's threatening big stuff, like, oh, Doctor, I'm going to, destroy your timeline and all that. Like, oh, okay. It's a character I think I really like, again, based on reading Target novels and what had gone back in the 60s and so on. But it just hasn't warmed for me at all in New Who.
It's an interesting concept because I don't have the same particular fond memories of the Great Intelligence that you do. I certainly remember the Yeti very well, or at least the 2 episodes that we had. I do remember Padma Sambhavar's voice performance in the audio tapes we had of The Abominable Snowman as being very effective, but I don't really remember him, and I suspect that if ever we get part 6 of The Abominable Snowman back, we will see that it is just another BBC foam machine monster. I think that, unfortunately, this is an occasion when my opinion is heavily tainted by the fact I don't enjoy the episodes that he appeared in. I'm just not sure what he's for.
Yeah, I guess I liked the character because it's just different. It's not an army of Daleks or Cybermen. It's not Autons smashing down shop windows. It's just something more intangible. It's a different kind of character. I think that's why I like it. But as I say, even loving Richard E. Grant doesn't save it for me. And you're right, it could actually just be the stories, and that just plays too much on my mind.
Yeah, I still don't know what the Great Intelligence wants. If I could sound a little bit like an artiste, what's its motivation?
Fair enough, yeah.
I'm going to mention one on this topic that I also have really struggled to decide which column to put it in.
Yeah.
And that's the Sontarans.
Ah, okay.
Now, I've got a couple of problems when it comes to deciding whether this was well done or not. One of them is that they weren't all that well done several times in the classic series.
Good point.
As good as the Time Warrior is and Lynx was, as good as Style was in Sontaran Experiment, look, I quite like Invasion of Time, but the Sontarans are not great in that. And they are terrible in the 2 Doctors.
Yeah.
So when you're judging whether they've done a good job at bringing them back, you almost have to move the curve and say, well, it wouldn't be hard to do it better than the 2 Doctors did.
Yeah, look, that's true. But what New Who's done is just change them quite remarkably, I think. To be very small and very comedic. I just find them absolutely stupid in New Who. I get that they're doing it probably for the kids, but why not just make a jokey new race if you're doing something for the kids and you want it to be like this? You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't bring back this classic enemy, which I know 2 Doctors is terrible. I take that fully on board. But they are still a classic enemy, and on paper they read really scary and interesting and such, this clone race of warriors. And, why turn them into a tiny comedic race, like jockeys in suits? Just horrible.
So this brings me to my second difficulty. Rob, I'll ask you, did you feel this way at the end of Sontaran Stratagem Poison Sky, or is it something that developed afterwards?
I didn't feel this strongly at the end of Sontaran Stratagem and Poison Sky. I did note, though, that they were small and comedic in that story, and it wasn't sitting great with me, but it got worse as time went on, and especially with Strax.
Okay, so that's interesting. I'm going to disagree with you because I quite enjoyed, in fact, I really enjoyed the way they were brought back in that first two-parter in Season 4. And, they were the big returning monster for Season 4. I thought that they were well done. I liked the size difference because it did make them that little bit different, that little bit alien. They weren't just men in rubber costumes. Okay, they were men in rubber costumes, but they used CGI to make them smaller and look like they weren't. And that, I think, added to the alienness. I liked, though, the way that they were extremely offensive. They were extremely effective. When the Sontarans do decide to take on UNIT, they are very, very successful at it. The way the Sontarans manipulate... what's the kid's name? Radigan?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, Radigan, I think it is. The way they manipulate him and then betray him, I think was very, very good. And that's the sort of thing that we had seen from Lynx and Styre. So I actually thought that in that returning adventure, even though the adventure had some faults in itself, I did enjoy them, asterisk, apart from the dancing.
Right, yep. Fair call.
But yes, I do agree, though. I struggle to think of them being used well since then. And look, Strax is probably the ultimate fandom divide. You either love him or hate him. I think our views are very much on the record. And I don't like him. I think he is terrible. So yeah, I can't definitively say they were good or bad on their return, because there were really good aspects. That Sontaran stratagem, I think, is better than Invasion of Time or Two Doctors, but they also had weak ones. So nuance.
Yeah. Look, I just can't get past images in my head of a big Sontaran, fighting with Tom Baker, who is a big man himself, and to just turn them into these little weird things. I just don't get it, Dave. I'm sorry.
Interestingly, so a mixed mark from the team on this one.
Yeah, very much so, it seems.
But I should mention as well, one appearance I really like the Sontarans in is Shakedown.
Ah, okay.
It was a VHS tape that came out. It was written by Terrence Dix, starred Jan Chappell, Caroline Ford, Sophie Aldred, Brian Croucher, Michael Wisher, and it was subtitled Return of the Sontarans. It was a direct-to-video sort of fan-made movie, although, had very big names in it for a fan-made movie, in about 1994, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sontarans in that are really, really good. And in that one, there is a very serious Commander Sontaran, and there is a comedy relief sidekick Sontaran, who's actually done really well. I really enjoy Shakedown, and that was a great appearance by the Sontarans.
So you get the best of both worlds there.
You kind of do there, yeah. And Terrence Dix did turn that into a new adventure as well, which was a very good appearance by them. As indeed is Lords of the Storm, the missing adventure they appeared in with Davo, written by David A. McGinty.
Yeah, no, that's one I own and have yet to read. Look for it on policebox.net, folks, in 10 years' time. I'll throw up another monster, Dave, from the 70s. Similar to the Sontarans, perhaps, insofar as they've come back and they were changed fairly dramatically. It's the Silurians.
Yes.
Do you want to have first go on this one?
I find it very hard to judge this. I said earlier in the episode, and I've said it many times, the Silurians is my favourite Doctor Who story. They were brought back in Warriors of the Deep, which I think is an underrated story, but the depiction of the Silurians there was appallingly bad. I didn't like their appearance in New Who. I thought it kind of missed the point, and it was kind of retreading. I didn't like the design either. I thought that it removed a large amount of that alienness from them. They are meant to be lizard creatures. They're meant to be monsters. So giving them that sort of Star Trek Voyager makeup, and it's really, really similar to the makeup on the dinosaur descendants in the Voyager episode Distant Origin. It's almost exactly the same. I didn't like that. I, though, appreciate the argument that it allows them to be more of a character, in the same way that the Draconians famously were better because you could see the eyes and the mouth, and the masks, or the half masks, allowed you to see more emotion. I get that is an advantage the new Silurians have, but I still err on the favour of no, make them monsters, make them inhuman, make them different. So yeah, I'm I don't have the same dislike for this one as I do the Cybermen, but I don't think they did it as well as they could have.
Let me ask you, when you were seeing pre-publicity photos of them, and they had the masks on, and they looked more alien, did you assume that that's just what they'd be like?
I did, and I thought they looked brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, based on what you were saying there, I thought, yeah, you probably would have liked that more if it had just stayed that way.
Yeah, what about you, Rob?
I initially thought it was clever that they had a mask on, because I was taken in. I thought that's what they look like, and then, the mask comes off. But over time, I thought, it's just a human in makeup. it's not really a lizard.
Yeah, and the other thing that they're missing is the third eye.
Yes.
Now, I can remember as a kid, one of the things about the Silurians was that they were terrifying because they had that power. They just had to look at you and zap you and you were dead, or they could melt rock by staring at it. You know, I love that thing in the Silurians, and it obviously, you know, is missing in Warriors of the Deep, and that's really unfortunate. They do bring it back when they come back in the novels. I mean, two of my favourite Virgin books, Blood Heat and Scales of Injustice,
Yes.
are both brilliant books that really do the Silurians justice. And I don't know why that wasn't brought back when they brought them back here.
Yeah, again, because like I was saying earlier, these stories are known. You know, people writing the show would have known of those books, would have known of those stories, and whether they were going to do an adaptation of those books or not, or just use them as some sort of just a basis for the stories. Why not go in that direction? Why reinvent the wheel when it's already been invented?
And done so well. I agree. I do give the Silurians a much better mark than I do the Cybermen, because I think the intent is good. And I do appreciate the rationale for making them people in makeup, because it does allow for more character and emotion. So I do think it is a valid and reasonable, and some might argue appropriate, creative choice. It's just not the one I would have gone for.
Similar to Strax popping up and maybe spoiling things for the Sontarans, do you think the return of Madame Vastra again and again sort of did something to how you think about Silurians? Because I think it did for me.
No, not to the same extent, because I felt so strongly after watching Hungry Earth. No, it didn't.
Okay.
Plus, I kind of had now developed this self-defense mechanism where I instantly remove any Madame Vastra scenes from my mind. Which means that she doesn't influence my opinion.
Very wise. Let's get back in time from the 70s to the 60s and talk Ice Warriors, Dave.
Yeah, these are kind of cool, aren't they?
I've long liked the Ice Warriors in terms of the 60s creation, because, gosh, when would Seeds of Death have come out on VHS, Dave?
I reckon it was definitely out by about 1990 and might even have been a year or two earlier.
I'm thinking maybe a year or two earlier, because I have vivid memories of borrowing that from the local library. And it was one of the first black and whites I watched properly, not a wonky copy in some fan's bedroom, but an actual, you know, nice copy. And I thought, oh, this is great. And it gave me a real appreciation for the Ice Warriors. I think it's a much better story, for example, than the Ice Warriors.
Oh, I totally agree. It would have been the third 60s story that I saw, as you say, as a proper quality story. There was the Crotons and the Mind Dropper, which were screened here in 1986 as repeats, and then that VHS came out, and yeah, like you know, it was a regularly borrowed copy from the video library. And yeah, that is a really good story. I love it. I love the way the Ice Warriors look, both in the old and the new series. Both of them have captured that way they just sort of tower over you. They have that nobility about them, but also that power about them, which Slayer in Seeds of Death does really, really well. And even in a weak story, and look, Monster of Peladon's a very bad story. It's one of the worst couple of Pertwee stories, in my opinion. But even in that, Azixia himself is a really good character and looks great.
I don't disagree with anything you've just said. But, when we get to the new series and we have this reveal that they're little guys in suits... Ah!
Yeah, I didn't mind it.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't mind it. I thought that it was an interesting new take. Again, it's not the creative choice I personally would have made, but in some ways I kind of liked it for doing that slightly different creative choice. And I must admit, as a kid, I never assumed that the Ice Warriors were in armour or costumes. I just thought that's what they looked like. That was what an Ice Warrior was.
Mm.
And yeah, okay, you kind of realise later that clearly they are wearing helmets and body armour of some sort, so... Yeah, what's going to be underneath is an interesting thing. I mean, and I'm referencing the New Adventures here a lot, because they did bring these monsters back a lot, but the New Adventure Legacy by Gary Russell, one of the big bits of pre-publicity of that was that there was going to be a scene where a Ice Lord took his helmet off, and how would Gary Russell describe it and everything, and that was kind of a big deal. And so I get that if you're going to do them, you kind of have to do that scene. Like, you can't not do that scene. And would I have necessarily done it that way? I don't know, but I thought it was a perfectly interesting and well-executed decision.
For me, it just seemed like Mark Gatiss was trying to add his own ideas to this well-established mythology and a classic monster, and he was just trying to put his stamp on it. Maybe it's just because I get so upset with some Mark Gatiss stories that I see them so negatively. And I get that it was creepy when the little creature popped out of the suit and was crawling around, above their heads and all that. I get it. I do get it. It was like a horror sort of thing, but it just spoils it for me. I just like to think of them like Sontarans as just big, buffy blokes who just, slap you around the head a bit. Not some weedy little creature that's hiding in a big suit.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I just don't feel that way. I actually disagree with you. I think that they kind of had to do it. I think if you brought the Ice Warriors back as these creatures in armour and not show what's under the armour, I think that would have been a bit of a cheat for a modern audience. So I think it had to be done. And I may not have made them quite as weedy as they did, but that idea of them being slightly more agile, nimble, and hiding in the shadows worked quite well. I had a bigger problem with the lack of clamps, frankly.
No, fair enough. But in general, though, I think they looked good.
They look great.
Even without the clamps, I think, they look good. I don't want to seem too negative on them. I think the look of them and their attitude has all been great since they came back. I just didn't like the size of the monster inside. That's my only beef.
Well, if that's your only beef, that's not a bad thing. And we've neglected, of course, to mention Empress of Mars, where, again, I thought they looked really good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the Empress herself looked really fantastic. A great new take on them.
Yeah, a couple of moments of acting decisions that maybe weren't the best from her, but
yes,
that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, was that the one I was comparing to the Wicked Witch of the West?
It was, yes.
Fly, my pretties. Yeah. All
so
right.
Look, we've covered most of the big ones. There's probably one big one we need to do.
Yeah, I can think of at least one.
Well, I'm thinking Zygons.
I was thinking Zygon too, yes.
I've gone first for the last couple, Rob. I think it's your turn. What do you think of the Zygons, which, of course, were the monster for the 50th anniversary and have since come back in their own two-parter?
Yeah, look, it's interesting, Dave, because we're not trying to concentrate on episodes per se, but I will say I wasn't entirely sold on them in that 50th special. I just didn't quite like how they were done. And they were a bit of an also-ran in the 50th anniversary special. I know they were there, but they weren't really the point of the story. What I can say is, like Ice Warriors, they look good and they act like Zygons, and that's really cool. And I think they're a decent enemy and they've been brought back well. But in terms of the stories they've been in, I haven't been entirely sold. So it's hard for me to sort of say much more about them, actually.
Look, I go back to what I said right at the start of this discussion topic. What is it that I'm looking for in a monster that's been brought back? I'm looking for them to be true spiritually to what they were in the classic series. Zygons definitely are that. I think they are similarly motivated, they look similar, they act similar. And are they doing something with it? Yes. The Zygons' main shtick is that they can look like humans. They can do that whole transformation thing. And they do that really, really well in all the episodes they're in. And they also, look a little bit better than they did. Not that they didn't look great in Terror of the Zygons. That's a design that really stands up well. So I think it's a big tick for the Zygons from me. My only criticism is that we haven't seen the Scarrison yet.
Oh, there's still time. Look, I broadly agree. I think they look good, they act well, and if they're put into a really great story, I'll have no problem with them at all.
Yes. Look, I mean, I have big problems with Zygon inversion. I think the politics in that is very, very warped. I think the Doctor is not just problematic, he's overtly racist in some of those moments. And that is a big problem for me. But that's not the Zygon's fault.
Dave, I've got a few sort of oddball choices on my list, but I've also got a semi-serious one I wanted to mention too. It's not quite a returning monster. In New Who, Dave, we've almost had the Naimon.
Ah, we did too.
In the God Complex, we had a Minotaur sort of species that was regarded as sort of a cousin of the Naimon. So I'm just going to say it was a Naimon for the sake of this argument.
And wasn't there something as well in the Time Heist episode?
Oh, yeah, what was that?
That was very Nine-One-ish as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've only watched that once.
Although I guess this is the interesting point. The Nine-One are obviously a derivative of the Minotaur.
Yes.
So, because that is such a classic image in human literature, I mean, let's face it, Doctor Who's done some variation of the Minotaur in at least 3 stories I can think of in the classic years, and it's therefore kind of inevitable that there will be some derivative of it as well in the new series.
Yeah, and here's an example of... It's because it's a story I really, really love that I think I like what they did here with the monster. This dying monster. I thought, this is beautiful. Why can't it just be a Nine-One? Why can't it be a Nine-One, Dave?
I guess because if they had made it a Nine-One with the same abilities and powers and influences that the creature in the God complex had, would you be sitting here saying that it wasn't spiritually true to the original Nine-One?
I don't know. I know Horns of Nine-One has its fans out there. They like it because it's so horrible. But I don't really rate it. So because I really like the God Complex, I'd probably say it was better than the original Nine-One.
You see, I really like the Horns of Nine-One. Look, okay, it's got some massive, massive flaws. And some of it is very silly. But it's very fun to watch. But part 3, where Romana goes to Krynoth and actually sees something very rare in Doctor Who. She sees a world where the alien invasion has succeeded.
Yeah.
And that's actually quite a terrifying concept. And the Nine-One in that part are actually quite scary, I think. And that's them at their best. So I actually give the Nine-One a big plus in that story. Maybe we need to see the Nine-One back properly.
I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind that at all, actually.
You mentioned you had a couple of other minor ones to throw at me.
I do. So let's just rattle through these quickly. Werewolves, Dave. Greatest Show in the Galaxy had werewolves, and of course we had a werewolf in Tooth and Claw. I like them in both.
Interesting. Again, we're mining a classic image of human literature.
Yeah.
And so it's inevitable that both series would do them. Interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way. I remember not being very keen on the werewolf in Greatest Show in the Galaxy. I think that what he's done in Tooth and Claw is done very well. It is very, very hard to do werewolves well. Even shows with really good budgets struggle to do werewolves particularly well. I mean, Buffy, the script around the werewolf characters in that were really, really good. The execution, not so much. Even Teen Wolf, which was a bit of a guilty pleasure series of mine while it was on, even in that, with all the makeup and everything they had, there were moments where the werewolves did look pretty terrible. And so I guess going down that concept of just making them as close to a wolf as possible actually works best. I think it was a very wise decision Tooth and Claw made there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say, wasn't there also one of these Universal horror movies in the past few years? Didn't they do a Wolfman one or something like that?
Oh, not sure about that.
And it might have just sunk and died a death, which is maybe why you can't think of it. Yeah, they are hard to do. But yeah, that was just a returning one. I thought, I kind of like Tooth and Claw. I kind of like what they did there. I'll just throw it in for fun.
Fair enough.
In a similar vein, Dave, we've also had the Macroback in a tiny sort of way.
Yeah, for about 13 seconds. I thought that was a lovely little reference that, again, fans of the show who know what the Macra are and who, like me, particularly love the Macra Terror, I think it's a great story. It was a lovely little moment to go, oh yeah, they're Macra. Anybody who's watching for the first time will just think it's the name for a monster the Doctor's just, discovered then. So, yeah, really well done. They looked not bad for the, few seconds of them jumping out of the gas that you saw.
They'd been driven insane or something, hadn't they? They were just like crazy feral Macra.
They were de-evolved Macra or something. Yes.
That's it. Yeah. Okay. Now I've got 2 really crazy ones, Dave. Not quite fitting the status of monster, but they are returning from the classic series, and they could be an enemy in some ways. How about the Sisterhood of Khan? Is that a stretch?
That is a stretch. I don't think they're really a monster, are they?
They could be monstrous.
Oh, look, I think that's a bit of a stretch. I thought what they did was pretty nice. It was pretty good. Yeah, what more can you say? I mean, I would have liked a little bit more hissing, a little bit more sacred flame, or the
Yes.
A
Yes.
bit more of that, but no, they were fine.
They were fine. Okay. And finally, Dave, the ultimate monster who have come back in New Who, the Time Lords.
Oh my goodness, there's a whole podcast in that. I'm going to pass on that one. I don't think I can say that in under an hour.
Fair enough. I'll say that I haven't been too impressed with how the Time Lords have been brought back, but maybe you're right. Maybe that is its own episode.
If I was giving literally my one sentence view, it would be that they are less impressive than I think they could be, but that would be a massively unfair simplification.
All right, well, that wraps up the monsters that New Who have brought back. Dave, I think you might have something else up your sleeve, though, before we move on.
Well, I've been thinking about some classic series monsters that I would like them to bring back. Now, I've thought about it, and one thing I'm really keen on is making sure that I'm not just trying to bring a story back. So, for example, you sit there and go, wouldn't it be great to have another story with the Crinoids or the Robots of Death? And then you realise, actually, no, it probably wouldn't be. Any sequel to those would probably be pretty terrible because they work so well in one story. That's a classic story. But, you know, the Crinoids aren't actually that interesting a monster.
No.
Although I must say the idea of seeing a CGI Crinoid would be pretty cool. But look, I think the Kralls definitely deserve a comeback.
Yeah, good.
The Zabi, I would love to see Vortis done with a modern budget.
Yeah.
The Crotons.
Okay, yep.
We've done the Silurians. Where are the Sea Devils?
Yeah, really good point. And can they come back in the samurai armour?
No, I want fishnets.
I love the samurai armour,
no,
Dave.
I want the fishnets.
Okay, fair enough.
The Cheetah People.
Yeah, good one. Although we have had cat people. That's sort of similar.
Oh, that is true. I think, again, if you're going to bring the Sontarans back, you need to do the Rutans.
Yeah, fair.
And finally, we need Pteroleptals.
Oh, now that would be good.
Could you imagine modern budget Pteroleptals?
Yeah, now that would be really nice. There's so much more you can do there. Like you say, some stories, there's nowhere else to go. You know, after Robots of Death, what do you do?
Yeah.
Well, I guess there were those novels that weren't too bad, like Corpse Marker, but putting those aside...
They were less about the robots than they were about the society, and that's the point, I guess.
Yeah, very, very true. But a Pteroleptal, yeah, I think you could do something there.
All right, Invasion of the Pteroleptals. Let's put a submission into Chibnall.
Chivers, listen up.